Hello, hello, and welcome to Sprout Sessions. My name is Vera Flores, and I'll be your host today for our very last session. I work on the community team here at Sprout, and I'm thrilled to be with all of you. Our goal with Sprout Sessions is to bring our industry together and arm you with insights to inspire you to take action on your own social strategy. We'll get started in just a moment, but first I want to cover off on a few housekeeping items. These sessions will be recorded and live on our YouTube page. So if you have to step out, no worries, you can access the recording immediately following the presentation. We also encourage all of you to engage with us and your fellow professionals on social by tweeting at Sprout Social or by using the hashtag Sprout Sessions. This is a digital conference, so be sure to get social with it. Lastly, our speaker has agreed to stick around for 10 minutes following the presentation to answer any questions. To ask questions, please use the chat panel to the right of your YouTube screen. You can ask questions throughout the presentation, and we'll filter those over to our speaker. Now let's get this session started. Allow me to pass it over to Lizz Kannenberg, Director of Content here at Sprout Social, to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Vera. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Voice Lessons, how social can inform, impact, and shape your brilliant brand voice. Today, we're going to talk about smart voice development and how social is really the ideal channel for perfecting your brand voice. So as Vera mentioned, I work here at Sprout. I'm the Director of Content. I am also the resident brand and copywriting nerd. So I'm the one who's always like, wait a second, how are we saying that? What are we saying? Why are we saying? Is it on brand? Is it us? Is it different from our competitors? I'm a total geek about it, and these guys are probably sick of hearing me talk about it, but I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to hopefully express why it's so important to me and to all of us who work in social and in creative. So the reason I am so passionate about this stuff can be summed up in this quote from Jason Fried of 37 Signals. So they make Basecamp and other business and productivity software. He said, when you write like everyone else, you're saying our products are like everyone else's. That's because people really don't fall in love with products the way they fall in love with brands. And your voice is the window to your brand's soul. So there are a lot of philosophies about how to develop your brand voice. I am the rare type A creative who likes to have an organized approach to work in. So I've completely fallen in love with this idea of brand voice design. That's applying solution-based design thinking principles to the development of brand voice and tone. It's basically the idea that if you ideate, develop, and implement with a systematic approach, you'll arrive at your solution more efficiently, and then you can iterate as necessary to keep developing over time. It's also closely related to content strategy, which is, of course, near and dear to my heart, because you really can't be interesting unless you have something interesting to talk about. Okay, so now I've hopefully sold you on the idea that a systematic approach can work in a creative discipline like voice and tone development. So there are 4 primary phases in brand voice design. And each of these is important to go into with an open mind and with an idea of who you are as a brand. So the first is to gather inspiration. Take a look at anyone and everyone who has a distinct voice that makes sense for their brand and figure out why you like it and why it works for them so you can apply it to your own voice development. Second and third, which kind of go together, are to generate ideas and then bring those ideas to life. So start doing it. Start applying your inspiration to your own brand, and then just start trying to put it into action by putting pen to paper and bringing your voice to life. And then finally, listen, learn, and evolve. That iteration, that idea that you're never quite done, there is no one solution because you can always be better, makes social really the best place to test your brand voice when you get to that place. So I thought it might be helpful to have a semi-real world example to put through our systematic brand voice design process. So let's say we are a new brand of natural fruit juice soda, and we're looking to develop our voice through brand voice design. Shall we? Cool. So that first step is to gather inspiration. Now, the best place to start is to look within and revisit our brand positioning. We want to remind ourselves of really what makes us us, what makes us special and different. So in our case, we're going to remember what our audience loves about our product, what their functional needs are. And for our soda company, that we're refreshing. And then we want to remember what being our customer says about them, so what their emotional needs are. For us, we know that people who like our brand really are in love with the lighter side of life. And then finally, we want to make sure we're keeping in mind what our differentiators are. For us, it's that we are about real ingredients and how being real is more fun, and that sets us apart in our industry. At the center of those three things is our brand position. And what we've called that is the effervescent side of life. All right, so keeping that in mind, social really is the perfect place to find inspiration because there's a critical mass of content to examine. So when we look for inspiration and we think about who we want to be like, there are three key qualifiers that I think we should keep in mind. The first is authority. So no matter who we're finding potentially inspirational, we want them to be people who really know their stuff, whether it's culture, politics, even boring stuff like semiconductors. These are the people who everyone looks to in that industry for authoritative commentary and content. The second is influence. These are people who really inspire people to do something, whether it's just simply laugh or make a donation or buy something or turn their attention to a certain cause. We need to figure out why they're so influential and why what they say and the way they say it inspires people to take action. And lastly is affinity. It's really easy. These are people who are well liked on social. So start examining why that is. The next step is to put it all in a mood board. I love doing this. I love pulling all of those ideas of inspiration that I've gathered from social in one place and then start looking at the common themes and the common threads between them, what they're talking about, how they're talking about it, how they're interacting with their audience. I like to do a combination of inspiration from different places. Public figures are great. Influencers and celebrities obviously have a lot of content to pull from. Looking at other brands, consider brands that are in your brand neighborhood, but not exactly in your industry. And that just means that people who buy your brand or your product are probably buying these other products for different areas of their lives, but they're not your direct competitors. Social personalities, they're just people who are big on social because of how they talk and what they talk about. And then finally, media companies. So think about where your brand would advertise if you had unlimited budget and go to those media companies' social profiles and look at how they're talking and how their voices come to be unique in that space. Because chances are what makes you think that they're reaching the right audience as a media publication for your advertising also means they're reaching that audience with their social and they're doing something right with voice and tone for the audience you want to reach. So ask yourself with all of these, what does their voice sound like? Why are they effective? And how do they translate that voice across multiple channels, not just social, but also anything else they're doing, their actual publications, television commercials, how they do social or email, even customer service, just how it comes to life across all their communication channels. Okay, so if we go back to our real world example, our soda brand that embodies the effervescent side of life, we did our mood board. We came to a conclusion that Anna Kendrick is as a potential inspiration that really embodies that effervescent side of life. We love her because she's real, she's human, she's funny, she's smart, she's everything we want to be to avoid sounding like a blah generic brand. She's truly effervescent. Okay, cool. So we've got our inspiration. So next up is those middle two phases in our approach where we generate ideas and we start to bring those ideas to life. These two things really go hand in hand, kind of like strategy and creative. So this is probably where a systematic approach is most useful. There are three key steps to look at in generating ideas and then bringing those ideas to life. The first one is to identify 3 to 4 personality traits. These are attributes that really stood out to you in your inspirations and which you feel like together will allow you to create a really cohesive voice. The next step then is to examine how each of those traits come to life. So what aspects of the traits do you love and which ones are not quite on brand? Make a list of those things and then just start doing it, start writing to it, start figuring out how that actually comes to life. And then the third, and this is why brand voice design takes into account not just voice, but also content strategy, is to think about your content pillars. So how does your voice translate across all of the different things that you as a brand need to talk about? Yes, you need to talk about your products or services. You also probably talk about cultural or lifestyle touch points. You often have customer service situations, and your brand voice kind of needs to work for all of those scenarios. Okay, so first up, identifying the 3 to 4 personality traits. Let's really do this. Let's think about it. We've looked at our inspiration, we've built our mood board, we've figured out why we love Anna, and we pulled 4 personality traits that we feel like embody the brand for our natural juice soda. We're bubbly, we're curious, we're straightforward, and we're fun. So the next step is to examine how each of those traits come to life. And the first thing I like to do is to lay the traits out across next to each other and then look at each from the perspective of what we are about that trait and then pull out something that we're definitely not, so we have some boundaries around it. For instance, we're bubbly, but we're not hyper. And then I just start writing to that. If I say I'm bubbly, but not hyper, what does that mean I am? And what does it mean I'm not? So first off, we're more, do you love a good pop psh as much as we do? And we're not, pop goes your mouth because your mouth goes pop. You can sort of see how that comes to life. We're curious, but we're not unapproachable. So we are, pop and fizz are two of our favorite sounds. What's a new band that pops and fizzes for you? But we're not, +2 scene points to anyone who can name the original influence for MIA's Paper Planes. For anyone who's interested, it's Straight to Hell by The Clash. Totally great record, check it out. We're straightforward, but we're not plain, we're not boring. So we are, when life gives you lemons, see if they have limes too. But we're not, nothing is more refreshing than lemons and limes. Pretty clear distinction there. And then finally, we're fun, but we're not slapstick. So we are, green grapes are delicious, but this green grapefruit was a bitter disappointment. But we're not, what do you call an old grapefruit? A raisin fruit. All right, so finally, when you think about how your brand voice extends across your content pillars, I love to just set it up as a matrix. So across the top are the 4 things we feel like we need to talk to as a brand. We need to be able to talk to culture. We need to obviously talk about our product. We need to bring our brand to life, and we have to consider customer service situations. And then on the y-axis, line up your 4 personality traits that we've just done our work to determine where we sit in each. And then start writing to each of those scenarios. Forgive me for not doing it, but it takes a long time, and it should be the hardest part of this process. Okay, and then I would be totally remiss if I didn't remind you to keep a close watch on your industry and make sure you're not following the pack. So I know this just in, you got to differentiate, just constantly differentiate yourself. And I'm going to step back from my soda example for a second to talk about an industry where this is a huge problem. Automotive marketing is super, super generic. It has been for decades. And the main reason is because everybody talks about what the features are, not how they affect a real person's life. Great example is there are currently 62 vehicles on the market that have earned safety awards from the IIHS for 2018. There is only one of them talks about love like a person would in the context of if you love someone, you want to keep them safe. I'm pretty sure you know immediately who it is. It's Subaru. And it's even worse for a company like ours who's in tech. Did you know if you Google full service solutions provider that you'll find 47,000 companies using that in their marketing? And if you Google provider of value added services, there are more than 600,000 matches of companies using that, which is kind of weird because why would you sell a service that didn't add value anyways? But really, what's going to inspire me to pick one full service solutions provider over another? Probably a distinctive brand that comes to life in their brand voice. Okay, so lastly, we want to listen, we want to learn, and we want to evolve. And brand voice design can impact every area of your marketing communication strategy, but social is by far the most important to pay attention to because of loops, specifically feedback loops. The feedback loop in social, as you guys know, is the shortest in marketing. So you have an opportunity to experiment with how your brand personality comes to life in the written form and take note on the fly of how your audience responds. You're not committing to, a billboard that's up for 6 weeks. You're not committing to a television commercial with a whole media buy behind it. These are posts. They're in people's feeds for a couple of hours. You know almost immediately whether they work or not. So this really should be your proving ground for exploring your brand voice, expanding your brand voice, determining how your brand voice comes to life in each of those content pillars. And in addition, you want to listen to not only how people are talking about your brand or to your brand, but listen to how they talk to each other. So if your target audience, say our target audience for our natural juice soda is teenagers and college students, I want to know how they're talking about their day, when they're stopping for a soda break. Maybe it's after class, maybe it's more like when they're studying late at night, but how they're talking to their friends about those activities should influence how my brand gets involved in those conversations. And as always, if something doesn't work, don't be afraid to change it. The stakes are low, the feedback loop is fast, you can iterate, move on the fly, and get better almost instantaneously. So now that we've gone through the brand design process, and hopefully I've given you guys a little bit of a roadmap as to how to apply this to your own brand, I thought it would be good to look at a few organizations that are doing a really good job at this. The first one that I love is Innocent Drinks. They're from the UK. They make healthy drink products, fruit and vegetable juice, and they are just absolutely like irreverent British humor at its best. And their brand position is really that being healthy isn't all that hard. It's actually absurdly simple, and that people overcomplicate it unnecessarily. So when it comes to culture and marketing and health and wellness and all this stuff that they should be talking about as a brand, their brand tone really creates sort of a send up to all this stuff that takes itself too seriously. So for culture, one that I love, this is the second year that they've done this. They're kind of doing a takedown of the absurd national holidays that brands latch onto just to have something to talk about. And they've targeted Penguin Awareness Day, which is apparently a real thing. And in their take on it is who's not aware of what a penguin is. So in this example, they have a GIF that flashes between actual penguins and things that are not penguins. And their stance is that they will help you identify what is and isn't a penguin. When they talk about their product, it's kind of the same thing. So in this example, they're talking about super juice. They say it's super, it's juice. It's a sensible name, all things considered. So it's a little bit of a wink about how it doesn't have to be that hard to talk about great products. And then aligned with their brand, since they're a health and wellness brand, January is a big time of year for them. So all of their competitors are talking about maintaining your New Year's resolutions and looking at January as a month to really ramp up your motivation. And they're saying, here's our January motivation. If they can make 904 Fast and Furious films, you can make it through today. And then I love the asterisk at the bottom. That's the little wink. That's an estimated figure. Actual number maybe much higher. And then my next example is Slack. So as some of you may be aware, Slack was actually a happy accident as a product. The company that makes Slack was originally designing a video game and used Slack as an internal tool for communication between their dev teams. And when the video game didn't pan out, they decided to bring Slack itself to market. And they've maintained that sort of wonder about the world, and that happy accidents are possible anywhere, and that you can be irreverent. You don't have to be super serious just because the product you make is not that much fun. So, productivity software isn't necessarily the most fun topic, but they've taken the approach that making it more enjoyable to be at work really is a fun topic. So their angle on culture is to make it more fun to be at work, to enhance your company culture through the use of Slack. So they're talking about ugly sweater contests or cookie bake-off. Plan the perfect team party with these apps for Slack. They're getting something across about their product, but they're also maintaining that why you're using your product because you're at work can be more enjoyable. And when they talk about their product itself, rather than just saying, we've been through 5 beta releases and we've iterated in XYZ ways and we've released these new features, they have a little bit of a playful spin on it. So they refer to baking in the oven for 5 beta releases and now being a fully cooked app. And then finally, when it comes to brand, they're trying to establish authority. Webinars are a great way to do that, but just saying webinar is kind of dull. So much like we've called ours Sprout Sessions, they're alluding to the fact that it's Wednesday except where it isn't. So there's that. Also, come to our webinar that's not called a webinar. It's just a fun little winky way to say, we get it, webinars are kind of boring, but here's a more enjoyable way to think about it. Okay, so some key takeaways as you walk away from this. Things I think to keep in mind if you want to implement brand voice design for your own purposes are that your brand position is your North Star. This is really the first thing to figure out. That slide I presented on it with emotional needs, functional needs, and differentiators is a great place to start if you're still working on your brand position. Once you've got that nailed, then you can start looking for inspiration. You can understand what works for those brands that are in your brand neighborhood, for those influencers or celebrities that you feel like talk to the audience you're trying to reach, and think about ways to adapt the things that work for them to your own brand. Third is really important. I think too many brands rest at traits. They say, oh, we're funny, or we're approachable, but they don't really think about what works or doesn't work within that. And it makes it hard to extrapolate your brand voice across multiple channels when you've got multiple teams working My favorite is it's okay to let your freak flag fly. You don't want to sound like everybody else. You don't want to say the same things. Even if your product or your service or your organization isn't on the surface the most exciting thing, there is something unique about you or you wouldn't be around. Bring that to the front. Let people see it and let people dig into it. And then last, social is awesome. It's your best proving ground. It's your opportunity to do whatever and whenever you think might work and know that you're going to know whether it worked quickly and you're able to iterate on the fly. You've also got unfettered access to the people you want to reach and what they talk about that doesn't involve your brand or your industry. So listening is a great way to make sure your brand is being relevant in ways that are outside of your product. That's what I got. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. You had some really great insights, and I really loved how you highlighted how brands should really talk about the how versus the what. Features are great, but it's kind of hard to tell the story about what it is without talking about how a consumer can use it. So we'll jump right into our Q&A. We've got some great questions from YouTube, and first one up, Liz, is from Matthew, and they ask, when creating a refreshed brand voice, how do you ensure the brand voice stays consistent across all departments?
That's a great question. That's one of the biggest challenges I think any growing organizations face. Setting up that matrix that we referenced in the presentation, where you look at all the things that you as an organization have to talk to, and then all of the ways that you want to have your voice come to life, is a great place to start. And once you've determined within those content pillars, like within culture, where am I talking about culture? Is it in does it have to come through on social? Does it have to come through on above the line advertising? Does it have to come through in email advertising? You can identify, I think, where each of your brand voice touch points are most relevant. I have been through an exercise where we looked at humor, for instance, as a core brand voice trait. And we just talked about how principal it was to each area of our advertising. So for instance, on social, it was much more important to us than it was on point of sale.
That makes sense. I think that messaging across all departments should remain consistent, but can look different for the different channels that you utilize across marketing. And of course, social is going to be a little bit different than your email or your direct mail. So thank you. So next question comes from Samantha, and they ask, how do you feel about external voice of your brand reflecting into your internal brand and culture?
That's great. That's a great question. That's another one that we look at often at Sprout. I would say that there are two ways to look at it. You can look at a brand voice that's external and trying to reflect that internally, or you can look to your internal culture to help develop your brand voice. I think that one is probably the most sound way to approach things, and understanding that the way you talk to your employees is going to be different than the way you talk to your potential customers. But still, your employees are the heart and soul of your brand, and that will come to life most naturally if you start with them.
Definitely a great point about highlighting how employees feel at work. And if you create really great culture, it's going to come out throughout the great work that they produce, but they're more likely to spread the word about the great company and all the great things that they're doing. So our next question is from YouTube as well, and they ask, what is your advice on finding the right balance between sounding salesy to your followers and inspiring them?
That's great. I read a great quote the other day that said, you can't force a movement, you have to inspire it. And I think because the stakes on social are lower and the frequency of messaging is much higher, you have a much better opportunity to establish this sort of non-product focused content pillars for your brand. So if culture is one of them, then within culture, what are you trying to talk about? Let's take something that's specific to a brand. Like I love Subaru as an example, so I'll stick with them. Obviously, they sell cars. They sell extremely safe cars. Their brand is built around this idea that if you love something, you should make sure it's safe. And they've built in messaging that appeals to families. They've built in messaging that appeals to dog lovers. I loved the ad they did with the time lapse of the puppy growing up, because what you love is going to be different for every single person. But they've shown you enough examples of what you love that you feel the message that you want to keep it safe, no matter who you are and what you care about. So I think
awesome.
it's a really, yeah, it's a really easy example that everyone is familiar with to keep in mind.
Yes, I also love the dog commercials, so I am their target audience. Um, so our next question asks, when rebranding or recreating your brand voice, what teams should be involved internally?
Awesome question. It's going to be different at every organization. Whomever has been responsible for developing your brand positioning should probably lead it, because they're the person who knows, or the team that knows most intimately what makes your brand different from everybody else. And that's the key to brand voice. You know, as you said, there are 600,000 full service software solutions or whatever it is I said out there. But what's going to make you choose one over the other is a sort of emotional connection you have with it. So whoever has determined what that differentiator is in your audience and what your potential customer wants from both your product and from the emotional benefit of being your customer is the person to start with brand voice. And then you have to incorporate writers. You've got to bring in somebody who's been writing consistently, not only about your product, but about why your product is superior in the marketplace. So that may be your product marketing team. It may be an in-house creative team if you have one. For Sprout, it's the content team. We write most consistently about the combination or the intersection of our product and what we do with how we try to make the world a better place. So it makes sense to live with us.
Awesome, thank you. So next question is also from YouTube, and Val asks, how do you adjust your focus if you realize your target audience has changed and the goal is now shifted from mid-market customers or small to medium businesses to enterprise?
That's great, and one that's particularly close to my heart. I would take a look at first, not just the type of business that you're trying to reach, but the person at each business and where they are in their careers. So, for instance, if you were trying if you're trying to sell at a small and mid-market level to somebody who is an active practitioner of whatever your product does. So, you know, say you make accounting software, you're trying to sell to the person that has to use the accounting software all day. That is one approach. It's very different from when you bump up to the enterprise level. You're likely selling to somebody who oversees the person who's managing the accounting software every day, but isn't doing it directly. So your story needs to be more about value to the whole business than value to the person who's using the product.
Definitely agree with that point. So we have time for one last question. And this is about, the question is, how would you approach creating or tailoring your brand voice if perhaps you worked for a smaller, maybe more regulated vanilla brand, maybe like a small local bank?
Great. I think you've got a lot of opportunity to reach people on an emotional level, especially if you are local and you're part of a community like that. So rather than talking about what you can offer from a functional level, like checking account interest rates and stuff like that, talk about what people can do with the benefit that they get from being your customer. So if instead of talking about the rate of return on your savings account, talk about what you could do with that extra money that feels relevant to the community. So tailor the content around like an upcoming county fair that's coming up, and you'll have potentially 20%. Well, 20 is probably pretty. I started checking or a savings account somewhere that gave me 20%, but you'll have a 2% more to spend on cotton candy at the county fair. So there's an emotional benefit there that really has nothing to do with whether or not you understand the functional benefit, but really connects you to something that's going to make a difference in your potential customer's life.
Awesome. That's really interesting. I like how you highlighted the emotional narrative there. I think that oftentimes a lot of brands get focused or like have tunnel vision and only focus on what they're offering. So I think that if you're a small company and you're deeply rooted in your community, you should definitely highlight that as well. People are more likely to be drawn to companies who are doing something for community or take a stance on something. It really proves or shows that they're rooted and committed to something. So thank you so much for sharing a couple best practices there. Thank you again to Liz for taking the time to talk about tailoring your brand voice and going through that amazing exercise. Super tangible, and there's some great takeaways there. And thank you all for tuning in to Sprout Sessions all week. We're so glad to have had you. Friends, keep your eyes peeled. We're going to compile some of the major takeaways from the session and share it with all of you. Feel free to continue the conversation on social media using the hashtag Sprout Sessions. And from all of us at Sprout, thank you so much for joining in.